Hey there, guys. This week we're taking a look at kind of I want to call it a new age mono black control. A lot of the classic ones used, things like Ravenous Rats and a heavy creature kill spell package, and this is something that has kind of fallen out of favor. It used to be a lot more important when you had the former meta. We had a lot of, targeted kill needed for things like Infect. You needed to take down a lot of those creatures fast. Have a lot of options in your hand so that if they were able to use Vines of Vastwood in response, you could, then use a second kill spell and so on and so on. Also important to have, multiple copies of the Echoing Decay and the wide creature kills. So what we're looking at now is a metagame where creature kill is still very important. There is still a lot of aggro out there, but also discard is something that is a little more important for all the fissure post out there. And this is a deck. It is not my list. This is a list I had taken out of the dailies. I have made one small alteration to it, but it is a pretty solid deck. When I saw it, I was very excited. I'm definitely a mono black player from long past, and when I saw this, I think it has a lot of great options to really balance things out in the first game. And there's a lot of odd choices here that you may not think of when you think mono black control, not so much for something that's there that maybe shouldn't be as something that is missing. One of the key things that I found to be missing with this was Ravenous Rats, and that is something that has been a mono black staple for as long as I can remember, and it is a great card. It comes in really low and allows you a really fast play on that discard, but what it does trade off with is only 1 damage, and I think this deck actually manages a really great way around some of these things. So what this deck is able to do is slow down a little bit. You have no turn 2 plays. All of your creatures come in at 3 mana cost. So in the early game, turn 1 and turn 2, what you can expect from yourself is basically going to be, or if you're the opponent, is going to be targeted kill, or non-targeted kill, I guess, with Geth's Verdict, or discard. A little card draw maybe with a Sign in Blood. Snuff Out is something that maybe, but it's too obvious. You won't come across it much in the early game, and maybe that 4 life is something you don't really want to pay right away. So this deck actually moves a little bit slower than most classic mono black control decks, whereas it doesn't get that early game turn 2 drop on the, say, Augur of Skulls or the Ravenous Rats. So let's look at the creature base real quick. The discard abilities that we are dealing with here are going to be Liliana Spectre, and even these are only ran as a 3 of, as opposed to the typical 4. So you're running kind of a smaller base because most decks did run Spectre and Chittering Rats, and that was kind of discard alongside Ravenous Rats. What we do have here is a smaller discard ability here off the Spectres. Still going to give us a lot of great options with the flying and evasion. The 1 toughness is a bit of a drawback, but you do get at least 2 power to balance it. I guess that's probably the only saving grace off of its heavy casting cost. Chittering Rats we're all familiar with. It is a great card, 2/2 rat for 3. That allows you to force your opponent to put a card from his hand to the top of his library. Now, beneficial to your opponent, he gets to choose. Beneficial to you, this means that he is basically skipping his draw step on his next turn, because whatever he had in his hand already goes on top of the deck, and he is drawing into that. So it's going to work out really great. It's not actual discard, but it is delaying the draw and slowing him down quite a bit. Phyrexian Rager is pretty fantastic. We're all familiar with that. The little 2/2 for 3. I love him in any deck that is running black. It allows you to draw a card for 1 life, and that's something that black players are more than familiar with, trading cards for life. Very simple. What these also do is, before we get to this last guy, is they all fall into that 3 range, which is fantastic because you are running Unearth. So you see here we're running a moderately low base of creatures, even for mono black control. Only 15 creatures, but it's going to be balanced out kind of by the fact that we have 3 Unearths in the deck, and these are going to give you that chance to play one of these creatures again after use. That's a lot of great opportunity. Basically, you're only playing 15 creatures in the deck, but it is going to count towards about 18 because of that ability to reuse it. Obviously, some Grave Fate could slow you down. You need to have something in the grave to use it, but you also get some other options out of Unearth, like the ability to cycle it for 2. If you find yourself in a really bad situation here where you can't find a creature to die, you're in kind of a stalemate, you need something to go, something to kill somebody or do something else, maybe you want to cycle that instead of holding it to act as creatures 16, 17, and 18. The last creature we are running, and this is another thing that is a little bit unusual, is a full set of Crypt Rats. This is something that in a lot of the classic decks have been ran as a 2 of, or maybe even a sideboard option, because of the fact that they can cause damage to you as well as your opponent. These work really great, obviously, in mono black control because of the fact that, the drawback is that you can only use black mana, but that is not a problem because you're only playing black mana. It's a small creature, so it doesn't have a lot of abilities on the battlefield outside of this, but it is one of the few cards that we do get in Pauper that allows you to wipe the board. You pay X, and Crypt Rats deals X damage to each creature and each player, so you have to be smart about that. I have seen a lot of players, I even did a video here talking about it a while back at this point, I guess. Be smart about using it. Like I said, it does do damage to yourself. So I've seen players use it to draw a game that they had no chance of winning, to take it to a fourth game in hopes of finishing off an opponent. Something you have to be aware of. And having 4 of these is great. We are finding ourselves in a relatively heavy aggro metagame, and this is damage to each creature, so it does hit flyers as well, which is great for things like Delver, which kind of rides the boundaries between aggro and control. So having multiples in the deck is great because when they come on the battlefield, you can only use the ability for, say, 2 or 3 to clear the board. And then if your opponent in the late game has rebuilt his status and really gotten himself back together, you can use another one for another 2 or 3 and clear off the board. And you're not doing enough damage to really hurt yourself significantly, but at the same time, you're keeping the board clear. So it's really great. It's basically the same as running a little bit of a mana heavy, but still Wrath effect. Moving beyond that, our only discard abilities are going to come from 3 copies of Duress and 3 copies of Distress. Now, the difference between the two, other than the mana cost, is the fact that Distress, for an extra black mana, is going to allow you to make your opponent discard a creature. The only drawback from this is it is a target non-land. Duress has the drawback of non-creature non-land, so that is going to be less effective against aggro decks, obviously, because it can't target down those things. Still something you want to keep in mind. You can use it to get rid of a lot of the pump spells or enchantments that things like Hexproof or Stompy have. So these are going to be great, and I think this is something that Mono Black Control has kind of gone away from with the quote-unquote classic version that I've been talking about. It kind of went away from discarding to running just simply a heavy creature kill package for its non-creature spells. This is kind of going back to where it used to run these. It used to run Corrupt. And having the discard here, I think, is great. It can help to kind of slow down Fissure Post, in my opinion. It is not by any means going to be your win condition. It is not going to work great to absolutely slow them down or ruin their game, because they do rely kind of heavily on the combination of the wall combo. And I think I've even, playing around with this, I might have thrown in a single bog or 2. But what we're going to see is this is going to allow you ability to kind of throw away some things early on. If you consider Fissure Post, right, there are a couple of different versions we're seeing currently. There is a mono blue version, there is a Simic version that is blue and green, and obviously an Azorius version, which is just shown up, it is blue and white. Now, out of those 3, if you look at Simic Fissure Post, it's something that does not rely so heavily on that graveyard combination. It is something that, will run it in a smaller amount. Blue Post is very, very focused on it, and so, discarding a Temporal Fissure is not going to be a huge threat to them because they have walls that they can get it back with. And even the Azorius Post is going to be really reliant on that as well, which is why I think I might throw bogs in this from here out. But, so it gives you options to just throw the game off a little bit if you can get rid of the Temporal Fissure, if you can get rid of maybe even a cheap artifact or something to slow them down just a little bit. That's all you're looking to do at this point in time, and try and maintain through that. I think it's still going to be a pretty tough matchup in the first game, but we do have some options in the sideboard, which we'll get to in a minute. As far as the creature package, the creature kill package goes, a lot of great choices here, but none of the kind of low-cost traditionals. We do have Geth's Verdict, which is obviously going to be Diabolic Edict, with the added effect of causing your opponent to lose a life when he sacrifices that creature. You do pay a second black mana to do this, as opposed to a second colorless mana. So that's something that's not hard for this deck to do, obviously, and Verdict is going to be your choice over Diabolic Edict every time in a mono black deck. So that's kind of your traditional great one. This deck is very reliant, as you'll see if you're just looking here, on the non-targeted kill. It gives you a lot of great options against, getting around things like Vines of Basswood, which is very plentiful in the few Infect decks we do have, as well as Stompy, as well as Hexproof. So it's going to be something that you want over Doomblade. There's also a lot of things like the post decks, which tend to be a little lighter on creatures and give you, a better chance to get rid of what you want. Obviously, the more creatures your opponent has out, the less effective the edict effects are going to be. but I still think there's a pretty good argument to be made for having these in over just Doomblades. Next up is Tendrils of Corruption. This is great because you do have a lot of options here to do damage to yourself. Things like 4 Crypt Rats and 4 Sign and Blood are going to cause you enough self-damage, as well as the Rager. So having Tendrils is a great option here to really get your life back together. It's going to work out pretty great. You also will find yourself occasionally facing down aggro decks that get through really fast, do a lot of early damage, and you're going to need some comeback to make it to that mid to late game where you're going to kind of balance things out. Now, this is something that obviously you don't want to be running too many of. The 4 cost is very heavy, and that can make it a little cumbersome to get around, but usually it balances out with the life gain. Next up is Spinning Darkness, and this is another one where you're getting some great life gain off it, and I think it's definitely important. Even Snuff Out, I forgot to mention, you can use that for a cost of life as opposed to its actual 4 cost. So you want to really balance out all of this self-damage that you're doing as well as whatever damage your opponent's doing. Spinning Darkness is kind of an oddball card at the fact that it comes in at 6 mana. Odds are good you're not going to be paying it for 6 mana. It has this extra ability where you can exile the top 3 cards from your graveyard, top 3 black cards from your graveyard to play it for free. This is not going to be a huge deal, but you do want to be aware of what the top 3 are. I usually recommend keeping open your graveyard at any point in time during the game, so you're aware of not only what targets you have for Unearth, but what targets you'll have in your graveyard for Spinning Darkness. There are opportunities where you can play Spinning Darkness, but you may not want to because you have, the 3rd card there is, say, Phyrexian Rager or Crypt Rats, which you're hoping to get back with Unearth. So you're going to want to hold off on that just yet. But that's another great option for, again, getting some life out there. It does have a drawback off of the non-black ability, the same way that Snuff Out does, but it's going to work out pretty well. If the worst case you're facing a black deck, you can simply trade it out in sideboarding, and hopefully, because you're only running 2 of for each of these, it's not going to hurt you too badly. Snuff Out's another great one. Like Spinning Darkness, these two are really kind of cool kill spells because of the fact that you can play them for nothing, basically. You can be completely tapped out, and you can still use Spinning Darkness and Snuff Out to, kill your opponent's creatures. That can give you a little bit of an edge at some points in time, when you can get around things. You can play lots of spells and get around having tapped out lots of early plays, thanks to the fact that these don't require mana, basically, to play. Also, obviously, Sign and Blood. These are kind of staple cards. Sign and Blood is obviously a 4 of. That's something you always going to run 4 of in mono black control. It's a really great option for drawing cards, and a really great option, actually, if you wanted to kill your opponent or do 2 damage to your opponent. Something to keep in mind. Mana base is maybe a little heavier than I wanted, but again, this is not my personal list. I've only made a single change to this. It's running 19 Swamps and 4 Barren Moors. You've seen a lot of, not so much classic, but at least recent mono black control decks running additional cycling lands, and that might be a bit much. But Barren Moor is definitely something you should run 4 of because of the fact that you can find yourself in a situation where you are a little heavy on the land. So cycling away a Moor or 2 gives you an opportunity to try and draw into something that is better. The land base, like I said, I think after playing around with it a lot, I might want to put in Bugs, because they are actually, I don't know, it's Grave Hate, I think, is something that really kind of needs to step up its game in the current meta. I think it definitely will. Not, talking about what kills Fissure Post, and there's not one specific thing that you can do to stop that deck. You need to kind of combine a bunch of things, and I think between Land Destruction, Discard, and Grave Hate, you can kind of balance that out. So I think even just a single copy of the Bog in here would be kind of a great thing. May not come up all the time, but it would at least give you the opportunity to use it at some point. Having it there increases the odds that you can use it than having it not there. If it's not there at all, it's never going to come up and never be a factor. But if there's one copy, well, there's at least some chance that it could be a factor in a game. So I think that pretty well explains main deck. Let's take a look at the sideboard, and I'll discuss my one change here. Deck is kind of really interesting in the sideboard options, but very, very meta-specific, and I think a pretty good option. Running 8 copies of Land Destruction, 4 of which are Choking Sands, destroys target non-swamp land. If that is a non-basic, then it deals 2 damage to that land's controller. So when you use this to kill off, say, a Cloud Post or any other Locust land, it deals 2 damage to an opponent, which is great, can help you get a little bit more damage through. I said we are running kind of a relatively low creature base, so having a little extra damage is great, especially against a deck like any of the 8-post decks, where they're going to be gaining some life off of Glimmer Post. In addition to that, you are running 4 copies of Rancid Earth, and this is kind of an old school throwback, right before the ban when Is It Post was really up there. And really running rampant. They were starting to run, 6+ copies of Land Destruction in the sideboard, and this is just going right back to that because we're finding a lot of that going on. So Rancid Earth here is going to be another great option. An interesting one here, this one has the Threshold ability that when you destroy a land, if you have Threshold, which is 7 or more cards in your graveyard, which is very easy to do, then it does 1 damage to each creature and each player. So again, a little extra damage to an opponent. Probably the 1 damage to each creature thing is not going to be a huge factor. That was something that worked out a little bit better against, the Storm decks, and even then it wasn't that fantastic. But, your options for Land Destruction in black, there's really nothing else to go with, and that 1 damage to player is going to be a little bit better than, say, any of your other options in black for discard, Land Destruction. So, moving on from there, a little extra kill spells. We do run 4 copies of Edict and a single Verdict. This will bring us up to a total of 8 copies if we bring them into the main deck for Edict effects. Obviously going to be used very well against things like Hexproof, can be used against Stompy. It works really great to get around whatever Vines of Vastwood or other Hexproof kind of effects there are out there, and gives you a lot of great options for killing things off. In addition to that, we kind of round out our discard package with a 4th copy of Distress. And then this will be the one change that I did make. The original deck list ran a single extra copy of Duress. And I've decided to trade that out for Raven's Crime. Now, there's kind of this ongoing balance between Duress and Raven's Crime. Duress is really great, works against, control decks very well because of the fact that, control decks are usually light on creatures anyways, so you can use it to get rid of, counterspells and stuff like that. What Duress does allow you to do is you get to choose what card your opponent is going to get rid of. Which is fantastic. But a lot of times what I find, I use Duress a lot against Delver Blue and other blue control decks. So a lot of times in exchange for, the Duress, they will simply counter it. And this is a balance because odds are good with that Duress, you would have gotten rid of the counterspell anyways. And what they're doing is preventing you from seeing what else is in their hand. So what I like to do instead of a 4th Duress, I like to bring in a single copy of Raven's Crime. Raven's Crime does not allow you to choose what is discarded, but the retraceability does allow you to replay it. Now, there's kind of a fine line here between this deck and having extra lands. You do want a lot of extra lands, a lot of extra swamps gives you more life gain off of tendrils, also allows you to hit bigger off of Crypt Rats, but there's still an opportunity here to discard lands to retrace abilities. Raven's Crime, I can't decide what my opponent's discarding, but there's a chance that I can reuse it on multiple times. You also get this balance between the discard creatures and that. With the discard creatures, you have a creature that has to, be played in a lot of situations because of the fact that you're running so few creatures, and the discard, you can't really choose when that happens. If you need a creature and your opponent has no cards in hand, well, you're probably still going to play that creature, even though it's not causing a discard. With Raven's Crime, you get a little more control over when it's played, but I think it works out better than a 4th Duress because, say you use Raven's Crime anyway, they may just counterspell it, and instead of it just, getting rid of that single counterspell, you hold an opportunity later on, you can use it to get rid of more stuff. Delver really likes to have cards in hand, and if they start reaching that point where they are not drawing things, and their hand is really low, then they can't control the tempo of the game very well, and you're going to start to find yourself in a better place. So that's the one change that I did make. That's just, I guess, personal player preference. I'm sure a lot of people would argue with me on that one, but I really like the copy of Raven's Crime in there, and I think it really balances things out. So there you go. We're going to throw out the videos there and check out the rest of the article and see what I got to say.